Hi, everybody. We are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And you are incredibly welcome to our coverage of the Hulu show, the Hulu FX documentary Pride. We'll get back to that in a minute. But first, let us tell you why we're here. So, we are both two social scientists with PhDs and who are obsessed with talking about culture, to be completely honest, both popped and lived, and using the training that we've had to help other folks see culture in new and distinct ways. That maybe if we can learn to look at the world through lenses that are not our own, we can live more empathetic, inclusive lives. It's a theory that's proven true so far, which is one of the reasons that we keep doing this. And our conversations on the YouTube channel and on our podcast range from coverage of a documentary about the history of the gay rights movement to discussions around the importance of bounded joy and the cultural phenomenon of Hallmark movies. It goes the gamut, folks, and we definitely take detours into happy places like The Handmaid's Tale along the way. We talk to each other all the time. We turn on the recording devices for y'all because we're hoping to spark conversation. Wherever you are encountering this conversation, trust me, we want your responses. So rate, review, like, subscribe, whatever is appropriate. And how to get a hold of us is always within the show notes of where you are engaging with this.
This video is both part of a series of our look at streaming content and educational content available, and also part of our Pride coverage. So on our channels, we love to learn about and watch and discuss stories, usually by and about women or other marginalized groups. So this fits into that slot, but obviously it is also Pride Month here in June, and this docu-series was dropped very kindly by our friends at FX and Hulu in time for Pride this year. So we thought, why not? What better thing to do than learn and watch and discuss with y'all? So that is where Pride fits in. We are up to episode 2 of this series, 6-part series, and each episode looks at a different decade. So this decade is the 1960s riots and revolutions. And we, full disclosure, we both loved this episode. We loved the first episode. We loved this episode. This one focuses a lot on the shifting generational changes within movements for queer rights and recognition and acceptance. So we learn about some of the laws that were brought in against LGBTQ plus folks, like it was illegal to serve known queer person alcohol.
Sure.
Cool, America. Great. But we also see the organization of movements that start and coalesce, as often happens around the same time as the civil rights movement, and very influenced by the civil rights movement.
Blatantly so.
Blatantly so. We spend some time with the civil rights movement and a gay man named Bayard Rustin, who was new to both of us, which we are upset about. And the way that activism was used to kind of further these discussions. And then the second half of the episode focuses on a person we will really love talking about, Flawless Sabrina, who was a queer loving mother figure in the drag community, both in New York City and around the country, and very, very influential in her time. And it wraps up with this idea that we're moving into the late 1960s. We're getting all of these kind of revolutionary cultural movements, and that certainly impacts the queer rights movement at the time and queer expression. And we get this kind of pushback between the members of the elders of the movement and the Mattachine Society and folks like that, and the more radical young folks. The young are at the gates is the famous suffrage quote. So the young were very much at the gates by the end of the 1960s. Dr. Kristen, what did you want to talk about from this episode on the 1960s?
I'm going to go to Flawless Sabrina first, and then we can go back to Bayard Rustin
Yeah.
if you want to. Because while I could wax poetic about why we don't know about him, the answer is because he was gay.
Because he was gay, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
It's a short story that he was gay and also black. So there's two strikes of why we don't talk about him.
But like, he organized the March on Washington. Let me say that again. He organized the March on Washington.
Organized it. He's the one that taught Martin Luther King, in part, about nonviolent resistance.
And like, I'm sure, I mean, I've read lots and lots and lots about the civil rights movement. I'm sure he was a footnote somewhere. I'm sure I've read that name, but like, I should know him just as well as I know Stokely Carmichael and just as well as I know Dr. King, and I don't. Yeah. So that angers me.
It angers me as well. My mother, who grew up in the 1960s, graduated high school in 1962, I think, had never heard of him. So this is a generational huge exclusion and gap, and I'm grateful for this show for filling it.
What I would like to talk about in terms of Flawless Sabrina is the importance of her identity as a mother, a mothering figure, and kind of what that means. So when we talk about a lot of intersections, there are a lot of minorities and a lot of oppressed groups and a lot of marginalized, whatever word you choose to use for yourself. It's very likely that your family are members of that community as well. This is not the case frequently for queer kids. And also physical and mental, the disability rights movement also brings this up, that very frequently their parents cannot pattern for them how to live and exist in the world. Racial, ethnic, religious, very often, like you are there, gender, you have somebody in your immediate family your whole existence,
yeah,
that can pattern for you, pass down the knowledge of the ancestors, teach you the history, help you understand. Or actually, one of the hallmarks of queer life for a lot of people is expulsion from their birth or nuclear family. This was especially the case in the 50s and 60s, where we're at the precipice of coming out of the closet is valid and okay and potentially even legal, but societal acceptance is just nowhere near that yet. So we're at this specifically terrible intersection, which legally and emotionally and culturally we are now seeing with quite a lot of trans teenagers. For the record, when we talk about spikes of activity. So the found family trope that is present in a lot of queer literature comes from a very, very deep and true place. You have to find and create and cultivate your own family. And so for one of the first very public figures to declare herself as a mother was very poignant and important. And I wish the documentary didn't quite go into that as deeply as I wish it would have. But it's also possible it was just such a part of how like she was, and they thought about it, that they didn't want to harp on it, which is totally fair. But I wanted to harp on it a little bit here, because in the last 10 years, we've seen the free mom hugs movement, and every Pride, I have a lot of mom friends that post like, hey, like, I'm your mom now. Like, I will tell you to drink water and make good decisions. Like, I'm here for you. I got it. One of the last Pride parades I got to go to, I stood with a sign that said like free sister hugs. Like, that's a huge part of often the straight response. One of the ways that straight folks can be allies is to offer family. And something that is really, really sacred and lovely, but that this person who also then used that power within the community to promote the exploration of the performance of gender, not necessarily the identity of gender, because the intersections and contradictions between trans and drag and people's feelings around the boundaries between those two is not something we are going to touch on. But it definitely exists. But the thing with drag, that when you listen to drag performers talk about it, is this freedom of expression and play and joy that doesn't come with other forms of theater. So also all art is subversive on some level, and drag definitely is. And sometimes subversive art is my favorite art. And if you have never experienced live drag, I just can't encourage you enough. It is sarcasm and joy personified, and it's just so much fun. So if you have an opportunity to do that this Pride or any time of year, please do.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so important about this focus on Flawless Sabrina too, is this idea that the freedom that drag gave people was this idea of exploration. And at a time where you're figuring out who you are and where you fit and don't fit, the episode makes a really good point of stating that early organizations at the time they just called it gay rights, didn't even have lesbian like in the title until later. The gay rights movement, as it was called at the time, didn't serve trans people or young people. Especially for gender nonconforming folks, there really wasn't a place for them.
No.
And wherever you fall in the rainbow of gender or sexuality, a lot of people found a home and a family in drag and a freedom to kind of figure out who they were through those performances.
And still do.
Yeah. And it is still that to this day, which is just like something I never understood, as a straight white girl from a white town in Colorado, mostly white town in Colorado. I didn't know, or understand a lot of the politics of this, like personal politics, and why it was so important and subversive and radical to do this. And it was cool the way they talked about it in this documentary. And I think that the only other thing I wanted to bring up was that it really shows the differences in intersections and race, but also age, which we don't often think about when we talk about intersectionality.
We frequently forget to talk about that one. Yeah.
But as there is with all movements, and as we said at the start of the document of this video, there's a lot of cross-generational currents happening, and generational change impacting the movement for LGBTQ acceptance, but also rights and recognition. And it was a really great bridge piece between what they set up in the 1950s and what they can get into in the 1970s, when we get into some real generational clashes.
And the Betty Friedan of it all.
Especially with regard to anybody who was not a white straight woman in the women's movement.
Oh, Betty.
So I think that's the perfect setup to transition into episode 3 next. I don't have anything more about the 1960s, do you?
No, I will save all of my feelings for 1970s, because it will, knowing the 1970s, it will evoke them and deserve them. So
can't wait. So excited to talk more about Phyllis Schlafly. So we'll see you guys then.
Bye.